In this video, I'm going to cover the entire history of baseball in under 10 minutes. I hope. We'll have to see how it goes. The reason for doing this is because somebody challenged me to see if I could do it. I think a lot of my videos sometimes are a little bit long, a lot of them are over a half an hour, and the question was, could I summarize the baseball history in its entirety in 10 minutes or less? I have a feeling I might go over, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So let's start right up, no intro. I'm going to put a timer up here and let's see how I do. So the origins of baseball start with the myth that it was invented in Cooperstown, New York in 1839 by a guy by the name of Abner Doubleday. That is completely false. The real truth is that it was a slow evolution over time from older bat and ball games, most closely related to cricket and rounders from England and Ireland. But it was teams like the New York Knickerbockers and many other teams from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia that started to organize the game and make rules for it, each city having its own slightly different set of rules. And these teams were made up of professionals, but not professional athletes. We're talking professionals like dentists, doctors, lawyers, and they wanted to get out and just enjoy a game on the weekends, and it wasn't for money at all. But fans started to attend these games, and by 1858 they had the first paid admission. So some players started to think this could be a business. And one by one, a couple different teams started to pop up in the 1860s that would pay players under the table somehow to put together kind of a dynamite team. Teams like the Cincinnati Red Stockings are the great example of this. They travel around to challenge local teams around the country, and they would pick up players along the way if they went through a town and found a really great one. These early professional teams were run by the players themselves, but it wasn't long before the rich dudes around the country started to take notice and say, hey, we could probably make a buck or two from this game of baseball as well. So some of these businessmen formed the first leagues, like the National League going back to 1876. And they were the first leagues where the teams were owned by businessmen instead of the players. Some of the oldest teams that we know come from this time period. Teams like the Cubs, the Giants, and the Braves. And what these owners did to keep costs down was they instituted the reserve clause into player contracts. So the players had no rights to be able to negotiate a better contract with a different team. They essentially had them for life. Guys like King Kelly, Cap Anson, Dan Brothers, Ed Delahanty, Kid Nichols, and a young Cy Young are examples of players from this time period. The rules during this time period were also slightly different than what we know today. They had underhand pitching. Batters could actually call what pitch they wanted and where. The 4 balls and 3 strikes hadn't yet been worked out, and the distances to bases and the mound were all different. But by around the 1890s or so, all of these things had been settled to closely resemble the game that we have today. So throughout those late 1800s, there were a number of leagues that came and went as players tried to jump to get a better salary. But the one that persisted was the National League. And then the Western League started in the 1890s, and they had a lot of financial backing. So they were a rival to the National League. And around 1901, they moved a lot of their teams to cities where the National League had teams as well to challenge them directly. And as a result, the National League and American League both recognized each other as pretty good leagues, and so they combined forces in the early 1900s to form what would eventually become Major League Baseball. And as part of this forming, the World Series was established for the first time. The best National League and American League teams faced off against each other at the end of the season in 1903. This era in the early 1900s, 1910s was called the dead ball era. A lot of slap hitting, base running, and defense. Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, Tris Speaker, Walter Johnson, and Christy Matheson are the key types of players in this period. But in addition to the style of play, this period was also known for really cheap owners, and that led to a lot of cheating and gambling in the game. This all culminated in 1919 with the Black Sox scandal, in which the Chicago White Sox decided to throw the World Series and lose it on purpose in order to get more money from gambling than they had all season long for their pay. This was found out fairly quickly, and those White Sox players involved got banned for life. This led baseball to hire its first commissioner to clean up the game and standardize the way we play. Meanwhile, around that time period, there was this guy as well. He was a big guy, and he said, hey, look, if I hit the ball as hard as I can, it'll go out of the ballpark. That's way easier to score runs that way. And the owners liked it, the fans liked it, but the owners needed to install fences across the parks. And this is where we got a lot of the stadiums that we really know today. And the other dudes in the league were like, hey, if it's easier to just hit it out of the park, why don't we do that too? And so you have the live ball era. This is epitomized by players like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Lefty Grove, and Carl Hubble. and really high scoring games with lots of high batting averages and home runs and runs scored. These guys had huge personalities, and they carried baseball through the Depression years as one of the few areas that still made some money. World War II eventually did slow down baseball, though, as a lot of those young players enlisted in the Army. Ted Williams, Bob Feller, Hank Greenberg are some examples. Something else happened during World War II, though. Guys with all sorts of skin colors fought together in the trenches of World War II, and the times and opinions were changing. You see, there had been a gentleman's agreement going way back to the 1880s that black players would not be able to play in Major League Baseball. This way the owners wouldn't have to put up with fans complaining about having to watch black players mixed in among their white players, which is ridiculous, as we all know. And it wasn't until 1947 when Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson got together to sign a contract so that Jackie could be the first player to break the color barrier and play in the major leagues since the 1880s. It wouldn't take long for many other players to follow suit. Larry Doby, Roy Campanella, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and so on. And this would be the start of the 1950s and 1960s golden era of baseball, which would be dominated by pitching, but also really some big home run hitters and big base stealers as well. And the game was a lot of fun during this time period. Guys like Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, who I've mentioned, plus pitchers Sandy Koufax and Bob Gibson. This is a time where change came to baseball. Teams had been consistent for 50 and more years, same cities, same teams, but they started moving around to new markets in the 1950s, including the Braves moving from Boston and the Giants and Dodgers moving from New York to the West Coast. And not only those moves, but Major League Baseball also expanded into new markets with new teams. Houston, San Diego, Toronto, and Seattle joined the league over time, amongst many other teams as well. And with all this success, the players really started to ask questions during this period. They'd been asking questions for a long time, but if Major League Baseball and the owners were that successful, why weren't the players' salaries going up? And so they challenged the reserve clause in the early 1970s and were granted free agency by the courts in the mid-1970s. This brought in the free agency era, and players started to actually get paid for what they were worth, and they moved around or were traded a lot more often. This era had pure hitters like George Brett, Wade Boggs, and Tony Gwynn, Ricky Henderson, who was not only a hitter, but a base stealer as well, and fireballers like Nolan Ryan. Some of the teams, though, chose not to participate in free agency, and this resulted in what is called collusion, a time when the owners wanted to band together to depress the players' salaries in order to not have to pay them what they're worth. And the owners wanted a salary cap as well, so there could be a max amount of spending, which led to the 1994 player strike, and the first time since 1904 that baseball lost the World Series. But the players held firm through all of these negotiations, keeping free agency and not having a salary cap instituted, which led to players finally getting a fair share of revenue. And during this time period as well, a lot of those players started to look back in time and say, hey, they used to hit a lot of home runs. Why can't we bring back the home run too and hit a lot more often? Well, this led to the performance enhancing drug, or PED era. And let me be clear, PEDs have been around the game for as long as players have been playing it, including the golden era of the 50s and 60s. I think the difference here was the 1990s and 2000s. You saw a culmination of a lot of things. More technology, a greater understanding of the body and how to work out, and probably better drugs as well. And so starting with Jose Canseco, a lot of these guys started to really pump themselves up, and it kind of became a bit ridiculous what was going on. Tons of players were hitting 30, 40, 50 home runs, whereas that used to be a not so common thing. And records were falling almost every year between Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, and Barry Bonds. And the baseball fans, who are very traditional by nature, were pretty cool with the first time it happened with McGwire, but not so much the second time with bigger and bigger players who looked completely different from their early 20s, and records that were falling after only 3 or 4 or 5 years of existence. Baseball itself enjoyed the success of the PED era, but they had to institute drug testing as a result of all the questioning going on. And the players generally agreed, let's do this, let's not take PEDs anymore. For the most part, there were still a handful of guys who weren't quite smart enough to stop doing it. But slowly, the PED use has taken a backseat in the game, although there is 1 or 2 guys every year that seem to get popped for it. But in the background, as testing began, we started to enter another era, the analytics era in baseball. And the background of this one is these guys in the movie Moneyball. Well, it actually wasn't the movie or even the book. It was this guy, Billy Beane, who revolutionized baseball at that time. He was running the Oakland Athletics, who had a very strict budget compared to almost every other team out there, and he had to get creative to find players who had skill sets that were underlooked and undervalued by other team owners. Before this, players were evaluated by scouts almost exclusively, and they'd say things like, he has a great body, he has a great face, or I really like the way that the ball sounds coming off the bat. And this stuff is still really good information, but teams started also realizing they could use this new thing called math to figure out which players would lead to the most runs. During this era, the teams wanted to teach the pitchers to get batters out, you got to throw hard and spin the ball hard as well. And they wanted to teach the hitters at the same time to only swing at pitches that give them the best chance to get a hit. And when they do decide to swing, to absolutely swing out of their shoes and aim for the fences. If batters are more selective and pitchers are throwing harder, you get more walks. And if batters are swinging harder, you get more strikeouts and more home runs. And what happens is the game of baseball gets slower, especially for people that don't know the game very intricately. So baseball had to combat the slowing down of the game. And they reacted by making changes to the rules for the first time in a very long time to speed up the game. And I believe all of this recent work has ushered in a new era that we're just starting to see. But it's the tip of the iceberg, so it's too early to tell what it's actually going to look like. And it's a new era that's catered more toward a generation of people that, let's be honest, have limited attention spans. So if it takes too long to understand, then they've moved on. And that's something that I've been refusing to do for a long time. I put videos out there of what's most important to me, what I love sharing. That's why most of my videos are half an hour long. But I guess for this one, I've decided to give in. So a little over 10 minutes probably, but not too bad, right? That is the entire history of baseball. Make sure you share it with somebody in your family that you want to have them know more about the game. In the meantime, keep talking baseball, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you around.